The late afternoon shadows stretched long across the suburban street when Yu-jun killed the engine, his dark sedan idling at the curb like a predator waiting in the tall grass. He'd come to this neighborhood to finalize arrangements, the kind that required silence, precision, and the absolute certainty that no one would remember his face. His reflection in the rearview mirror was all sharp angles and cold calculation. The tattoos covering his neck and hands, visible evidence of his dangerous loyalty, were secrets written on skin. He was reaching for his phone to confirm the next move when a sound shattered the carefully constructed silence. A child's cry, raw and desperate, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Yu-jun's hand froze. His eyes snapped up just in time to see her. A little black girl, Judith, no more than 6 years old, running toward his car with a speed born of pure panic. Her small white dress billowed behind her. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, didn't seem to register the danger radiating from him like heat. She slammed her small hands against his window, her voice breaking through sobs as she begged, "Please follow me home." Welcome, my awesome family. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, do well to subscribe. Like and comment where you are watching this from. Now let's begin. Every survival instinct Yu-jun had honed over decades in the underworld screamed the same warning: trap, set up, ambush. His hand moved instinctively toward the weapon concealed at his hip, his jaw tightening as he scanned the street for threats. But then he made the mistake of looking at her face. In her eyes, there was no calculation, no deception, only terror so pure and desperate it cut through every wall he'd built around himself. This wasn't a setup. This was something far more dangerous, a genuine cry for help. Despite every rule he'd lived by, every lesson that had kept him alive in a world where compassion was a fatal weakness, Yu-jun found himself unable to look away. Something in those eyes, that mixture of helplessness, hope, and absolute trust that he was the only person in the world who could save her, made him realize this wasn't just an interruption to his evening. This was a moment that would change everything. Yu-jun's fingers tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Leave. Drive away. Disappear into the network of streets and safe houses that had kept him untouchable for 15 years. The logical part of his brain, the part that had survived 3 gang wars and a federal investigation, was already mapping escape routes and calculating response times. But the child wasn't moving. She stood there, one small fist still pressed against his window, her chest heaving with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. The door opened with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet street. Yu-jun unfolded himself from the car slowly, deliberately, every movement controlled. At 6 feet tall, with shoulders that filled doorways and ink that crawled up his neck and hands like smoke, he was a massive silhouette against the dying light. He had learned long ago that his presence alone was a weapon. People crossed streets to avoid him. But Judith didn't run. She looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes and reached for his hand. The touch hit him like voltage. Her palm was so small against his, her fingers barely wrapping around 2 of his own. She was wearing a small white cotton dress, now smudged with dirt, and her chest still heaved with sobs. She tugged with surprising strength for someone so fragile, pulling him away from the car, away from safety, away from everything that made sense. "My mommy," she gasped between sobs, already moving, dragging him forward. "She won't wake up. I tried so hard, but she won't wake up, and I don't know what to do." And you're the only person I saw. And please, please, please. Yu-jun let himself be pulled. Every tactical training session, every hard-won lesson about survival, every rule he'd written in blood, all of it dissolved in the face of a 6-year-old's desperate grip. He scanned the street one more time, his free hand hovering near the weapon concealed at his hip, his body coiled and ready for violence. But there was no ambush, no trap. There was only a child who had chosen the most dangerous man on the block to be her hero, and the terrifying realization that he couldn't bring himself to prove her wrong. Judith pulled him 2 blocks down, turning sharply into a narrow, unpaved alley that smelled faintly of mold and refuse. The houses here were skeletal structures, forgotten by the city budget, leaning into each other for support. She stopped at the rear of one, a back door hanging half-open on a rusted hinge. "In here," she whispered, her voice a strained wire, finally releasing his hand to slip inside the gloom. Yu-jun hesitated, his body instantly registering the transition from open street to confined space, a prime location for an attack. He eased the door wider, the gun now fully gripped in his hand, and stepped inside. The moment the stench hit him, his training failed. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood he expected, nor the sharp ammonia of a drug lab, but the oppressive, sweet and sour reek of long-term sickness and systemic neglect. The light was failing, filtering weakly through a single dusty window, illuminating the room like a grim stage. There was almost no furniture, just an overturned box, a threadbare blanket on the floor, and a woman lying still beneath it. Judith went straight to her, shaking her mother's shoulder gently, repeating, "Mommy, look, I brought someone strong." Yu-jun crossed the floor in 2 strides. He knelt beside the woman, his professional gaze instantly assessing the threat, only to find none. This was not a victim of a quick, violent hit. This was a casualty of slow, unseen war. Her skin was a terrifying ashen color, clammy with fever, and her breathing was shallow, rattling in her chest. As he gently pushed back the blanket to check her pulse, his eyes fell on the dark, mottled discoloration across her shoulder and the fading purple map of bruises around her ribs. The monster in Yu-jun, the part that calculated risk and return, went silent. He lowered his gun. He was not facing a rival, a snitch, or a policeman. He was looking at tragedy, the unbelievable, heartbreaking consequence of a system that had let a mother decay while a little girl watched. The sheer, naked vulnerability of the scene, a child pleading with a corpse, surrounded by the physical evidence of poverty and violence, was more paralyzing than any armed confrontation he had ever faced. He had come here prepared to kill a man, but instead, he was forced to save a life, and he realized with chilling certainty that the latter would be far more difficult. Yu-jun's thumb pressed against the woman's neck, searching for the pulse that was barely a tremor beneath his skin. It was thin, too fast, and unsteady. The fever was spiking. He could feel the radiating heat even through the leather of his driving gloves. She had deep, angry bruising, especially around the side of her head and ribs, but the immediate crisis was systemic: neglect, malnutrition, and a roaring infection. She needed an emergency room, IV antibiotics, and a host of questions that would bring social services, police, and ultimately, unwanted attention to him. He pulled his state-of-the-art smartphone from his coat, the stainless steel glinting in the dark room. He scrolled past the contact names he used for business, enforcers, lawyers, politicians, and stopped on one that simply read Doc Hua. This man was no hospital employee. He was a brilliant, disgraced surgeon who now ran a private, immaculate facility entirely outside the law, dealing strictly in bullet wounds, black market organ transplants, and discretion. He hit the call button, not bothering with pleasantries. "Doc, it's Yu-jun. I have an emergency." His voice was low and commanding, his focus razor-sharp. He described the location, the patient's critical condition, pneumonia, fever, internal bruising, omitting the specific cause of her injuries. "I need a full team, sterile transport, and your absolute sworn silence. No records, no names, no police. This woman needs to live, and no one can know how or where she ended up." Doc Hwa's sigh was a ghost of a sound over the phone. "This is not my business, Yu-jun. This is not our code. This is a debt," Yu-jun corrected, his eyes locking onto Judith, who was watching him with absolute faith. "It is the only thing that matters right now. Whatever your price, double it. Have a crew here in 15 minutes. Fail me, and you'll find out what kind of monster you've actually been dealing with." He ended the call without waiting for a reply, the threat hanging heavy in the stagnant air. He gently placed the phone back in his pocket, turning his attention to the only innocent person in the room. He had just bypassed the logical, legal path, and in doing so, had drawn his entire criminal world into a desperate act of salvation. The surgical team from Doc Hwa's facility arrived precisely 15 minutes later, silent men in dark scrubs moving with a cold efficiency that mirrored Yu-jun's own. They stabilized the mother, carefully taping a feeding tube into her nose and fitting a mask over her face for oxygen, before gently transferring her to a high-tech stretcher and out the back door. Yu-jun supervised every step, his sheer presence ensuring the silence he had purchased. Judith, meanwhile, had not left his side. As the crew worked, she had slid to the floor, exhaustion finally overcoming terror. She didn't seek out a blanket or hide in a corner. She had crawled closer to the mountain of a man who stood over them, resting her head against his thigh and wrapping one small arm around his thick, tattooed forearm. The ink was a dense, stylized portrait of a snarling tiger, a constant symbol of his violent domain, yet she held it as if it were a comfort doll. When the room was empty, and only the residual scent of medicine remained, Yu-jun looked down at the child. He saw the dark crescent of bruises under her eyes and the visible relief in her face. "She's going to be okay," Judith mumbled, her voice muffled by his coat. "She is now under the best care money can buy," Yu-jun stated, the words sounding clinical even to his own ears. Judith looked up, her expression a mix of relief and simple curiosity. "You came because I asked. That means you're strong. Do you have kids?" The question was a direct hit. He didn't have a life for children. He had a debt collector, a hitman, an empire builder. "No," he simply replied. Judith offered a faint, hopeful smile, running her fingers lightly over the tiger's sharp teeth on his arm. "Well, you would be a good daddy. You came when no one else would." The innocent faith in that small voice was the most powerful force Yu-jun had encountered in his entire criminal career. It wasn't praise. It was a simple, profound truth. He had arrived a monster intending to deal with a threat, and a little girl had forced him to become something else. He ran his thumb over the small hand gripping his arm, a gesture of tenderness he hadn't known he was capable of. "You will be safe," he vowed silently, not just to the child, but to the dying woman in the ambulance. "I will use everything I am to make sure no one ever hurts you again." He had just bought a debt, and the repayment would cost him his cold heart. Yu-jun did not leave the alley. with Judith asleep in the front seat of his sedan, exhausted and finally safe. He took out his phone and sat on the broken wooden porch of the abandoned structure, establishing his new command center. The night became his workspace, the moon his fluorescent lamp. He was not making hit lists. He was building a life. His first call went to Min Ho, his chief financial manipulator, the man who could make $5 million disappear and reappear as a church donation in a different country within an hour. Min Ho, I need 100,000, clean, untraceable. I want a trust fund established for a minor named Judith and her mother. Use 4 different shell corporations, route it through Singapore, and deposit it in a new domestic account labeled the Angel Foundation. The transaction was complex, criminal perfection used for an act of pure charity. Next came Park, who handled the organization's real estate laundering. Park, I need an apartment in a high-security, low-profile building 20 miles from here. Lease it anonymously. Stock it with groceries, furniture, everything new. The key is anonymity and immediate occupation. By dawn, they need a home. The most critical call was to Chief Forger, Ji-sun. I need new identities, full clean slate, mother and daughter, passports, IDs, medical records showing full health, and a plausible, untraceable job history for the mother to explain her income, something remote and flexible. No trace of their past names, and absolutely no link back to this location. He worked until the first streaks of dawn painted the sky, his hands flying across the keyboard as he marshaled his criminal empire. Every transaction, every order, was a monumental risk. Using the machinery designed for violence and theft to construct a seamless bubble of protection. He was weaponizing the black market, directing the terrifying efficiency of his organization toward saving a single family. By the time the sun fully rose, Judith stirred. Yu-jun was no longer talking on the phone, he was just staring at the peeling paint of the porch. Everything was set. A clean life, a secure fund, and absolute silence had been purchased. He looked at Judith's sleeping form, then at the squalor around him. This was the unbelievable truth. His life of crime was now the only tool capable of fixing a legitimate tragedy. He picked up his phone one last time and sent a single text to Doc Hua. Apartment secure. Transfer the patient immediately. He had done all he could do as a banker, a broker, and a forger. Now, he just had to wait for the final, permanent threat to emerge. The mother woke slowly, the heavy fog of fever and neglect lifting by degrees. She was in a bed so soft it felt alien, tucked beneath crisp, clean sheets that smelled of pure cotton. The room was bright, quiet, and sterile, with polished floors and equipment that hummed with a precise clinical efficiency. This was not the broken couch and pervasive damp of her last memory. This was a private luxury suite in Doc Hua's hidden facility. A kind, professional nurse with a gentle smile was checking her IV drip. "You're safe, ma'am. You've been very ill, but you are responding well to treatment." The mother, whose name was now simply Sarah, could barely speak. "My daughter, Judith, where is she?" Panic flared in her eyes. "She is fine, Sarah," the nurse assured her immediately. "She is in the adjacent room, asleep. She is being well cared for." The nurse spoke in soothing, neutral tones, meticulously avoiding the details of how Sarah had been found. When Sarah was strong enough to comprehend, the nurse explained the miracle. "You and your daughter have been taken in by a private charitable foundation. They specialize in helping families escape systemic poverty and domestic violence. They wish to remain completely anonymous, but they have covered all your medical expenses, past, present, and future, and secured a safe new living arrangement for you both. The sheer scope of the gift was paralyzing. A new life. No bills, no landlord threats, no fear of the streets. It was too massive, too sudden, too perfect to be anything but a dream. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, a relief so profound it eclipsed the nagging, exhausted suspicion of the situation. Who were these people? Why would someone do this? But she was too weak and too grateful to question the logistics of salvation. All she saw was Judith, safe and asleep nearby, and the promise of a future where the darkness of the past could not reach them. She simply nodded, accepting the new identity, the recovery package, and the chance to start over. She drifted back to sleep, believing she had been saved by an angel, utterly unaware that her rescuer wore a tiger tattoo and controlled the entire city's black market. Several days after leaving the clinic, Sarah and Judith were escorted by two silent professional women, Yu-jun's security personnel, disguised as charity workers, to their new home. It was a modest, but impeccably maintained, two-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a modern building far across the city. The anonymity Yu-jun had purchased was woven into the fabric of the place. When they stepped inside, Sarah stopped, her breath catching. The apartment was not just clean, it was fully stocked and staged. The kitchen glowed under warm light, cupboards full of groceries, and the refrigerator humming with fresh food. The beds were already made, and in Judith's room, a small desk sat ready with new crayons and notebooks. It was the fortress of normalcy, a meticulous, almost sterile imitation of a middle-class life that Yu-jun's team had constructed overnight. Every item was new, purchased with untraceable cash, representing a world away from the mold and decay they had left behind. In his dark sedan, parked 2 streets away and disguised amidst the rush-hour traffic, Yu-jun watched. He didn't use binoculars or fancy surveillance equipment. He simply observed the glow of the 5th-floor window he knew belonged to them. He watched the lights come on, signaling their arrival, and imagined the stunned silence of the mother realizing the scope of her deliverance. He sat there for an hour, the quiet hum of his high-end engine a counterpoint to the raging silence in his own mind. He was a man who lived by outcomes, and this was a perfect outcome. He had leveraged his criminal empire not for power or profit, but for this single square of light in the darkness. He felt no pride, only a strange, unsettling completion. He had paid his debt, fulfilling the innocent trust of a child. His job was done. He had built the walls. Now he could disappear back into the shadows and let them live the clean life he had fabricated. He put the car in drive, ready to leave them to their new, anonymous future. Weeks crawled past, stretching into a month, and the debt Yu-jun had paid still weighed on him. He had convinced himself that he was done, that the firewall of anonymous wealth and forged identities was enough, but the icy grip of professional curiosity, which he recognized was actually something much softer and more dangerous, kept pulling him back. One crisp afternoon, he found himself driving his dark sedan down the street near their new building, a ghost in his own criminal machine, making a reckless, entirely personal patrol. He slowed to a crawl as he passed the entrance, intending only a quick, professional scan. Then he saw her. Judith, bundled in a bright jacket, was playing near the curb under the supervision of her mother, Sarah. Her face was fuller, her eyes clear, and her laughter, a sound he had never heard, carried across the asphalt. She looked happy, healthy, and totally safe. Before Yu-jun could accelerate away, Judith looked up. Her eyes, sharper now, zeroed in on the massive Korean man in the tinted car. She didn't hesitate. Her smile bloomed, radiant and recognizing. She darted away from her mother, running toward his car, waving both hands with the kind of unrestrained joy only a child can express. She had seen the monster who saved her, and she wanted him to know she remembered. Yu-jun instinctively slammed his foot on the brake. He couldn't leave, not with her running toward him. But Sarah saw him too. She recognized the car, the man's size, the tattoos barely hidden beneath his collar, and the palpable aura of controlled menace. It wasn't the uniform of a social worker or a charity executive. It was the uniform of danger. She had spent a lifetime escaping men like him. Her relief vanished, replaced by a deep, instinctual terror. She lunged forward, grabbing Judith's arm and hauling her back from the curb with a sharp yank. Sarah held Judith tight, shielding her with her body, her eyes fixed on Yu-jun's black sedan. The message was clear. I know what you are, and I will not let you hurt my daughter. Yu-jun received the silent message. He hadn't given them a chance at a clean life. He had only built a cleaner cage, and now his shadow was already contaminating it. He stepped hard on the accelerator, disappearing quickly around the corner, leaving the joyous wave and the paralyzing fear behind. The fortress was vulnerable, not to the world, but to the architect who built it. Yu-jun had driven barely 10 blocks. The image of Sarah's terrified face and Judith's innocent wave burned into his mind, when his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It was from his intelligence chief, a man whose only function was to confirm threats. Yu-jun pulled over, his jaw tight. The message was 3 concise lines. It confirmed the discovery of their new address, the identity of the person who found it, the abusive ex-partner, located through a trail of ignored Social Security paperwork and a leaked forwarding address, and the fact that the ex-partner was currently surveilling the building. Yu-jun stared at the text, the blood draining from his face. His massive, sophisticated security measures, the shell companies, the forged IDs, the high-security complex, had been breached not by a rival cartel or the FBI, but by the same pathetic, petty monster they were running from. The sheer weight of his organization had been used to build a fortress, and a piece of discarded mail had rendered it useless. He had tried to use money and logistics to fix a human problem, attempting to buy his way into redemption. But the debt he owed Judith could not be paid with clean documents and luxury apartments. The walls were insufficient. They were merely wood and drywall, and the evil that stalked them operated outside the laws of finance and logic. Yu-jun accepted the horrifying truth. The only thing that could permanently solve this problem was the one thing he had tried to leave behind. He looked down at his own hand, the tiger tattoo seeming to pulse in the dim light of the car cabin. He had 2 choices: walk away now and watch his little miracle collapse under the weight of the past, or become the monster Judith had mistakenly trusted him to be and use his true nature for one final, protective strike. He thought of Judith's pure, trusting smile and Sarah's paralyzing fear. He had promised to keep them safe. And now, to honor that promise, he had to eliminate the threat, personally and permanently. He typed a reply to his chief, his fingers stiff against the glass. This doesn't touch the organization. It's personal. Off the books. I'll handle the disposal. He put the car in drive, executing a tight U-turn in the middle of the street. He wasn't driving away. He was hunting. The debt was due, and it was going to be paid in blood.